And the answer was that this had to be done because schools were not, well, let me just read out what they said. That children in Northern Ireland education attend denominational schools, either Catholic or Protestant. Church representatives play active roles in school management boards, and the result is that relationship and sexuality education, although a recommended part of primary and post-primary statutory curriculum of the Department of Education, is underdeveloped, and is at the school's discretion to implement the contents of the curriculum according to its values and ethos. Now, that's the whole crux of this issue, and that's why this has become, and this is an issue which all members here should be concerned about. Because what's the department now saying? What goes on in schools is not good enough. Why? And what's the specific complaint? Because schools and boards of governors and teachers and parents insist that this part of the curriculum has attached to it some of their values, their religious values, what their faith dictates. And, you know, sex and relationship education, it's not some mechanical thing. In fact, as the Catholic Church pointed out in their submission, they point out that age-appropriate, comprehensive and scientifically accurate is what the department says it should be for purpose of legislation. The Catholic schools said that in every major democratic jurisdiction, issues such as abortion, gender, bioethics, human sexuality are highly contested scientific and ethical issues and are subject to democratic debate, shifting electoral and legislative positions.
Point of order, yeah. And I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable gentleman. My hay fever is playing up, and I'm just wondering if I have permission to take my jacket off. It's very warm.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Can take their jacket.
thank you. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Now, here's the crux of the matter. If we now insist, and if the objective of the Secretary of State is to have valueless sexuality education, if that's then he is challenging those who teach it. He is challenging the parents whose children receive it. He is challenging the ethos of the schools. And this is where the problem comes. In responding to the complaints of CEDAW, that they don't like values being brought into this, and they want to have it value-free, he is saying to teachers, parents, and the people who control various schools across Northern Ireland, your views don't count any longer. They can't count. Because either your values are reflected in the education, or your values are not. Because we are going to demand in the curriculum and in the guidance that you don't bring your values into it. Now, in a free society, that's wrong. But in a society where we have strict laws governing against discrimination, then it's contradictory. And I want to challenge the Secretary of State and ask him, where does that leave the likes of St Killian's in my constituency, a Catholic school? I go to their prize distribution every year. I have great admiration for the work that they do. And their principal, could I comment on the speech that had been made at the prize distribution one evening? And he said to me, why are you surprised that the speaker, in front of all the parents and children, should take such a value-based speech and make such a value-based speech? After all, as an important part of our education is not just to teach them to be good mathematicians or biologists or linguists. It's to teach them the values that we hold dear and their parents hold dear. Now, the impact of this these regulations, is that those people are discriminated against. And as my colleague from Northampton pointed out, the Northern Ireland Act actually prevents you from doing that. It says that there should be equality of religious belief, political belief, etc. And Section 76 of the Act says, and you cannot discriminate against people on that basis. And yet, that's the essence of our opposition to this particular piece of legislation. What is appropriate? Who's going to decide what's appropriate? Oh, there's going to be significant consultation, the Secretary of State says. But since he's already agreed that the outcome has to be that what prevails in schools at present can no longer prevail, then the outcome is already of that guidance is going to be very clear. Teachers are going to find themselves constrained in what they teach, how they teach it, the values that they attach to it. In fact, they'll not be allowed to teach it. There'll be some kind of mechanical thing. You want an abortion? You can have an abortion. You want to find where you can get it? There's all the address where you can get it. Does it matter what the reason is? No, it doesn't, because we can't teach anything about values. Now, that to me, and that's why the member for Strangford has said the same, that's why I've had so many teachers and so many boards of governors and so many parents say to me, this legislation can't possibly be allowed. And yet the Secretary of State, although he knows it's sensitive, is just prepared to walk over the top. And I would like to hear from him. How does he intend to square that circle? That on one hand, this has got to be value-free. On the other hand, it's riven with value views. How does he square that circle? And whose side will he fall on? And what will be the sanctions for those schools whose teachers or whose board of governors who say, this is totally against our ethos. We can't do this. We've got to bring our values into it. What are the sanctions going to be? Do you want to make them all criminals? And it's something which has just been ignored in all of this. The last issue is the whole thing about parental opt-out. And the Secretary of State has said that there will be parental opt-out provided for. We'll have consultation on it, and we'll bring in guidance. It'll not be in place by the 1st of January. So this could be in place. Schools could be required to teach it. Parents could be required to have their children go to it, and there'll be no guidance as to what grounds can you withdraw your children from. And it's not enough for them either to say, well, there will be eventually. If the grounds are so curtailed, then it's not going to be an opt-out anyway, is it? And if the grounds are so wide, then why is he bringing the legislation in? He could find in some rural areas parents totally refuse to do it. What about a small school where all of the teachers, maybe 2 or 3 teacher school, all of the teachers say, this goes against our faith, it goes against our beliefs. We feel that we cannot give just a class on abortion without injecting some values into it. Who's going to teach it in that school then? That school going to be penalised? Teachers going to be penalised? What happens? And these are all the kind of questions which I think have been glossed over. I can see why he didn't want consultation. I can see why he wanted to tighten the timetable in this House. I can see why he is so vague about what is appropriate, what opt-outs will it be for parents, what will be the rights of those who feel that their faith is affected by a value-free relationship and sex education in schools. And I think that, once again, and I don't want to emphasise the points that my colleague from Strangford has made, since progress is being made in the Assembly, I don't know when the Assembly will be up and running. I suppose it'll be a longer time than what the Secretary of State hopes because of the inactivity in dealing with the real concerns that there are about the winter framework. But why is this the most pressing problem for it? There's no legal case, as far as I know, against it. There's no uprising by the population. I never had a letter about this or an email about this until he introduced this legislation. So why the priority given to this? Other than, I think, and believe you me, Secretary of State, it will not work. If you think that by introducing this you'll get a debate about you should all get back into Stormont so that these things can't be imposed on you, the exact opposite is going to be the case. This is seen as pure vindictiveness. It's got no justification. It's full of problems which have not been addressed and which significantly, in your opening speech, in the Secretary of State's opening speech, he didn't address. I hope that he will address the issue of where is the fairness in this? Where is the safeguards for people who hold strong views on these issues and who will be affected by the piece of legislation he's brought in?
Ian Paisley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and it's also an honour to follow the speech from my colleague Sammy Wilson. The member for Lichfield posed a question which I suppose he thought got to the nub of this, and which was around the lines of, well, if you were back in Stormont, you could sort this out yourselves. Basically, sod off and do it. I mean, that's the implication. Madam Chair, this has nothing to do with Stormont. This has everything to do with how law should be applied consistently across the United Kingdom and how law should be made, whether there is a Stormont in place or not. And I was hoping that the Secretary of State would have answered a series of questions that have been posed, because delegated legislation committees, by their very nature, Madam Chair, as you will know, usually happen in less than a quarter of an hour. Matters are agreed and it goes through because law is being applied consistently. And I would have hoped that the Secretary of State would have taken some time to address some issues, because this particular piece of delegated legislation was subject to a special scrutiny called the 44th report by the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee. And it posed a whole series of questions for the Secretary of State to answer. It actually said, I hope the Secretary of State answers the following, and listed a number of questions. And I was hoping that he would have answered them, would save me having to speak. Or that the Shadow Secretary of State would have maybe posed those questions too, to the Secretary of State. But it appears that that report, which I have in my hand, has fallen deaf on those who are here to hold the Secretary of State to account. And I'm not a voting member of this committee, but I will pose the questions that I have been asked, because I also asked a question of the Secretary of State, and he promised he would come to that question about Section 76, and he didn't bother. It wasn't in his speech. He didn't bother answering the question, because I know what the answer to the question is. I was told a very long time ago, never ask a question unless you know the answer. And the answer is patently obvious, because the Secretary of State knows that he couldn't give an affirmative answer to the question that I asked.